Good morning to everybody in Australia. We're delighted to be here. I actually just finished talking to Australia, as we refer to it, my house. We have relatives who live in Melbourne, and one of them has a birthday on April 1st. So we just called him and spoke with him. We're also delighted that Dr. Einstein will be joining us for discussion later. I suspect that she will probably have as much to contribute to this as both Dr. Wright and I do on this topic, but we will be happy to respond to specific questions. We'd love to hear some of what you're facing in your circumstances. We're sort of globally all in different places with sort of what the expectations are, yet we are all being asked to respond to something that is incredibly unprecedented, outside the experience of really anybody at this point in terms of a global pandemic of this nature, and the kinds of behavior changes we're being asked to make, and the kinds of ways we're trying to accommodate what is happening in the world and trying to understand it. So delighted to be here with you. In addition to my work at APA, I'm a licensed psychologist with many years of experience providing clinical care as well, with a particular expertise in anxiety. So hopefully our discussion today will be helpful to those of you listening, and that it may give you something to take to your colleagues and family members and community as well.
Yeah, hi, I'm Dr. Wright. I work with Dr. Bucka at the APA. I'm also a licensed clinical psychologist. I specialize mostly in trauma and severe mental illness, as well as emotional regulation and those sorts of issues. As Dr. Bucka mentioned, since this has started, we've really been tasked at APA with putting out a public health message around coping, as well as doing a variety of these types of webinars, talking to different groups about how we can be most effective in this completely unprecedented time that none of us ever expected to happen. We've generally been pretty unstructured in our approach to this. We really do appreciate you sending in questions so that we can make this really individualized and specific to the issues that you are facing, both in your career, but also in your personal lives as we transition to what might be our new normal for a while.
One of the things that we typically started with is just acknowledgement that this is a really unusual circumstance for all of us. And part of what makes it so challenging is three factors, really. The question around coronavirus in and of itself, it's an invisible threat. It's not something we can see. It's hard to identify. It's hard to know if we've done the kinds of things that are necessary to protect ourselves, our family, our community, which makes it particularly ambiguous and uncertain. And the ambiguity and the uncertainty are what tend to then contribute to our overall experience of stress and distress at this time, because it's hard to know how best to respond. We hope that everyone on the call is following the recommendations of national health figures and the local public health recommendations for the area that you're in. But beyond that, I have conversations with colleagues and neighbors and friends all the time. So do I wipe down everything possible when I go out? Do I keep hand sanitizer at the front door? Do I wash my doorknobs once a day, more than once a day? It's hard to know when you're trying to keep surfaces clean and keep yourself clean, how much is enough. And then that makes it hard then to sort of get a handle on, are you responding to the situation as best as you can? But as Dr. Wright said, one of the challenges is how best can we cope with the emotional experience that we're in order to then figure out how to address the situation and strategize and plan to deal with our new normal is really the challenge that many of us face right now.
One of the biggest challenges with uncertainty is that it interferes with our ability to plan, and it reminds us of all the things that are outside of our control. And to be quite frank, there's a lot of things right now that are outside of our control. There's really only a few things that are ever inside our control. Those are really our thoughts, our feelings, our behaviors. So how we act, how we approach the situation, and how well we keep our emotions as in check as possible. And that can be hard because, to be frank, this is a really anxiety ridden time. There is reason to be afraid. There's not necessarily a reason to panic. I think that's the difference. Panic isn't a very effective response to the situation, but acknowledging our emotions and acknowledging that it's challenging, and then turning our focus to what can we do about it? What's in my control to help me be the best that I can be right now? I think that's where all of us need to be putting our energies.
We haven't had it sort of, I think Dr. Einstein is going to contribute at the end, but certainly if there are things that you would like to jump in with or say, we're, as Vail, Dr. Wright said, we're pretty unstructured. So certainly
Thank you.
as important as you feel, okay?
Thank you. Thanks. I really like the comments about what's in our control and what's not in our control. I'm going to present a bit of a model a bit later, so I'll wait till if there's anything I can pop into, I will.
Okay, terrific. So when thinking about that, sort of the areas that we often are hearing people ask questions about tend to fall into a couple of areas. Sort of first, sort of thinking about the situation that we're all in and how we're responding to it. And then sort of two areas that individuals are often asking us about is sort of how do we cope with the whole telework situation that we've all moved to, and how do we do that and do that effectively? And then also thinking about questions related to just in general thinking and planning and managing our emotions and how we want to go forward. And I read something yesterday that I found incredibly helpful in helping me think about how I frame thinking about this. Many of us are looking at or first experienced coronavirus, COVID-19, as a threat, as something to be feared, something that was kind of scary. It has been helpful to me to think about it, reframe my approach to that, to think of it as a challenge to be met. Because the reality is, most of us have met challenges in our past. And because we're on this webinar today, we've gotten to this point. We've overcome them, we've dealt with them, we've sort of incorporated that and hopefully grown and developed some additional skills. Reminding ourselves of the fact that we have addressed past challenges, that we have found the kinds of skills and necessary to cope is really important to be thinking about how we move forward so that we don't get stuck in a place of feeling like we can do nothing, we don't know what to do. That's very important to keep thinking about that, particularly because the kinds of behaviors and the things that we're wanting to do and be thinking about are not only for what is helpful to us as individuals or to our small families, but really this is about a global community. It's about what's going to make a difference in my local community, but in the end, what will make a difference in the global community. And remembering that that's part of why we were engaging in certain things right now that may feel hard can help us in the long run when we think about the overall good end that we are trying to achieve by the changes in behaviors we have now. We certainly saw this during world wars, right? When the whole community planted victory gardens and really got behind the effort and supported the nation. It's even bigger than that now. We know in previous pandemics, when individuals have been in quarantine, when they have been able to think about the benefit for the larger good, that has helped them. It becomes incumbent on the local authorities to ensure also that people have clear information and resources to manage the quarantine kind of experience. So we have some control over how we think about our response to it, but we also need to work with our communities to ensure that the overall community has resources and what's necessary in order to maintain the necessary strictures of the quarantine or the shelter in place kinds of experience. But I'll stop and turn it over to my colleague for a few moments.
Well, I can piggyback on that, but I was also wondering if we had any questions yet. I can't really tell from the Q&A box, but I wanted to pause real quick just to see.
Hi, we do have a couple of questions. So one of the questions that came in is increasingly anxiety producing seeing so many individuals not practicing social distancing. How can I control my anger and how can I address this with these individuals?
Yeah, that one's really tough because it's one that triggers the things that are outside of your control. right? You can control how you want to approach the physical distancing by following recommendations, keeping yourself and hopefully your family and then everybody else safe. But we can't control what other people do. If it's people in our family or our friends, I think we can make hopefully some impassioned arguments around why it's important to follow these recommendations, maybe not even, and appealing not to maybe their sense of self to keep themselves safe, but keeping again the sense of community safe. But if it's strangers that you're seeing walking around outside in a non-social distancing kind of a way, because walking outside, at least in the United States, is still allowed even if you're in a stay-at-home kind of situation. But you know, you hear about people kind of throwing parties and doing some things that don't seem very smart right now. If they're not people you know, there's not much you can do about it. And so your only recourse at that point is to, one, try to empathize with where they're coming from. I don't think people are doing these things to be selfish. I think they're doing them because they're either afraid and this is how they're reacting to their fear, or, which is again, not very productive, or they're misinformed and they're not taking this as seriously as they could because they're just not as savvy either in terms of health literacy or taking in the right kind of most reliable news sources at this point. So if you can kind of recognize that, I think most people are not doing it to be selfish. I think that helps a little bit. And then we have to accept that this is one of those things that is just outside of our control and refocus our energies on what is in our control. And that's to continue to follow the recommendations. It's to possibly make some tough choices if there are people in your life that you know aren't following recommendations, you know, ensuring that you don't have contact with them for, you know, the foreseeable future until we have a better sense of when we're on the other side of this.
And depending on the kind of work setting that you're in or your connections in the local community, you may have some opportunities to try to support communication around what's needed, and to make that communication as clear and unequivocal as possible. For instance, the entrance to every park in my county is very clear with saying we're open, but don't touch playground surfaces. Don't be less than 6 feet apart from each other. No sports, no contact sports, and do not congregate in groups of 10 or more. That's how it's been defined for physical distancing for us. So we're seeing very clear, easy to understand language about what the expectation is, which helps to reinforce it across for everyone and kind of cuts out some of that questions like, is this okay or not? Because that's part of the challenge of what to do. But as Dr. Wright was saying, to really let go of resentment for what others are doing or not doing, really only eats away at us if we're not able to channel that into some sort of helpful behavior. And it looks like our colleague has a comment as well. Great.
Just in Australia at the moment, there were fines announced for people that were not social distancing and observing those rules. So I think in that way, we're on track, and it takes away the pressure for people to be trying to influence other people they don't know. And I think that what we're seeing in some is that there's just an element of judgment that's coming out. It's not bringing out our nicer side. It's kind of leading to divisions in our community rather than building our community, and that's coming from fear. So I think, you know, part of what we're trying to do is think about when you make the comment you made, Dr. Wright, about what's in our control and what's out of control, I think is really on set, because someone who we don't know, their decisions are not in our control, and it's not necessarily our responsibility to do something about it. We never know where someone is coming from and what's behind the scenes. So I think there's an element in Australia where we're a little bit lucky that there are no fines in place and we don't have to take that responsibility, so we can think about how to be considerate and build our community rather than divisive.
Great, thank you. The next question was, how can I as a manager support the mental health of my employees during this time?
Yeah, I'm so happy to hear someone thinking about that. You know, as a manager, you're in a leadership role. It may not be prime minister, it may not be leader of the state, the jurisdiction that you live in, but you are a leader of a group of individuals. And some of the important things to do in that area is to be clear in your communications, to let people know what you're expecting, but perhaps your expectations, especially as people are moving to more telework, which may be very new, and they might be doing it in the context of having other people in the home also teleworking, or having children at home who are trying to do schoolwork. What are your expectations? And perhaps the expectation, the thinking for productivity, particularly in the early phase of this, will not be what it would be if under normal work circumstances. So letting people know what you're hoping to do, providing flexibility, letting people know when you don't have answers, but you'll work to find answers. That's what we look for in leadership communication: honesty, willingness to be accountable for information, trying to think ahead and help people problem solve. And then, just as we would encourage with anybody on this webinar, Vail and I talk about this a lot for ourselves. There's sort of a foundation to good overall physical and mental well-being, and checking in with your team about those components, as appropriate as a manager, is important. So for you and anyone else, you're hoping that they're getting sufficient sleep, adequate sleep, decent nutrition, regular activity, even if it's not the activity they're normally used to getting. So they may have to be creative about doing that. And social support, whether it's from new ways of interacting with colleagues via Zoom meetings and all kinds of technology that we have access to in order to still have those collegial relationships, whether it's encouraging them to, your staff, to stay connected to family and friends who are important to them, even if they're not able to physically be with them during this time, but to find ways to maintain that connection is also really important for mental health, mental well-being. And if you're finding that somebody's stress, anxiety, emotional state is interfering with their ability to do their work in ways that is different from what you've seen before, talk with them about that. I don't know what the options are in the kind of work settings that you're in, but usually when someone's mental well-being, mental health is to the point that they're feeling, the individual's feeling particularly distressed about the state of mind that they're in, or that it's interfering with their usual role functioning, by role functioning meaning work or family life, that's a sign that it might be bigger than the person can really handle on their own. So getting sufficient support from friends or family or from professionals, those are the kinds of things to look out for as a manager, and to think about, how can I help someone get those supports in place so that they can cope with something that's really unprecedented.
And I think, to piggyback on that, our role as managers and leaders is also to model good behavior. It's to model good emotional responses and behavioral responses to this situation. So that means, us as managers need to do the self-care things that Dr. Bufka was just saying, so that we're not unintentionally taking out our own anxiety and stress on the people that work for us. In one sense, because we know anxiety can be kind of contagious. Like, I'm sure you've got friends or family in your life that, if you went to talk to right now, they would really ramp you up. And we as managers can often do that with the people that work for us unintentionally. The other thing I think to model is some behavioral qualities as well, like taking breaks, encouraging your employees to take breaks when they need them, letting them know that that's okay, that they don't have to respond to every email, modeling, not maybe sending emails on the weekend or in the evenings, or expecting them to respond, so that they feel that pressure, like they have to do the things. I think these are some of the behaviors we need to model: boundaries, taking breaks, unplugging, trying to stay calm. And then I think that will hopefully allow our employees to also feel like they can do those things too.
Okay, the next question here is, do you have any tips for getting my vulnerable parents who are over 70 to actually take the virus seriously?
I think many people are struggling with that. I just got off the phone with my over 70 parents about that exact question. And just before we turned the sound on, I was texting with my niece, who is concerned about her mom, who's in her 50s, about, are they doing the right thing? So every family has their own dynamic. You may or may not have the kind of relationship where you can say certain things to others or not, but it's the same kind of communication that you're hoping as a leader also in a family to think about, how can I clearly explain information? How do I understand my parents' acceptance of health information? We certainly see some generational differences in this. There have been some studies suggesting that older adults, at least in the US, tend to accept the information that healthcare providers give them and tend not to ask a lot of questions. So it can be important to know how older family members want to receive information. Do they want lots of details? Do they want sort of, here's what the basics are, the headlines? And if that's the case, try to provide it as clearly as you can in a way that will help them understand what the realities are. You can let them know the impact that it's having on you if they are not modifying behavior and seeming to take it seriously. And also think about, what is it that they would be missing out on if they did really follow the guidance in terms of the physical distancing, restricting interactions. And are there things that you can problem solve with them so that they maintain whatever it is that they're afraid of losing? So if they're not sure how to grocery shop online, are there ways that you can help them with that? Or is there concern about not having the social connections that they would otherwise have? And can you help them think through some ways of maintaining those, even if it's not in their usual meeting for Bible study or card playing or out to lunch with their retiree friends, whatever it is that they would routinely do? Can you help them think of alternative ways of doing that during this time? Those are some initial thoughts on that, but it's a struggle, certainly a struggle in the US as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm fortunate. My 85-year-old mother has been self-quarantined for over 2 weeks. But I have a sister in her 60s who posted a picture on Facebook of her not exactly social distancing, and I was pretty upset about it. I think that we need to be having these conversations, and again, without judgment, right? So I do think this is coming from a place of people thinking, not that they're invincible, but that they just don't think they're going to get it. They just don't think it's going to affect them. And reality, it might not, but that's not the right argument to be making, right? The right argument is, it doesn't matter if it affects you or not. It matters about how you're protecting your community. That's the point of this. The point of physical distancing is to protect your community and to protect the healthcare system so it doesn't get overwhelmed. And so I think appealing to that argument can be effective. Making sure that you're using good, effective communication skills, like not saying you're doing a bad thing, but instead saying, I'm really worried when I see pictures like that on Facebook, because not only could you get sick, but you're putting other people at risk. So that's a way to make somebody less defensive when you're having these conversations. And again, at the end of the day, we have to remember we can be as effective of a communicator as possible. We can have the exact perfect timing. We can say all the right, perfect things, and they still might not listen to us. And that's when we have to sort of accept that that's the case, possibly make some decisions to keep, again, our physical distance, and refocus our energies on what's in our control. And I know we have a hand up here.
I just make one tiny add. I love your explanation, but can I just also add, let the other person talk first. Let them tell you what they're doing before you put what Dr. Wright was saying, because that always gives a person the chance to kind of air where they're coming from, and it takes a little bit of the steam out of what's happening, and you can understand it before you pop in your sense of what we're doing for the community.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. Yeah, because you might find out that that it's really all about, I'm afraid of losing touch with my friends. And so then you understand where you can go with the conversation. But and we often have easier conversations when we're able to connect around the shared value, right? So the shared value might not be where you're coming from. If you listen and hear what the concern is, you might find the value that will help move them towards the behavior that you'd love to see happening.
There's 2 more questions. The next one is, lately, I feel like I'm not doing enough these days. This is a constant feeling between working from home, homeschooling my children, maintaining relationships with my family, my friends, my husband. Do you have any tips for how to deal with this?
I'm not sure that you can say you're doing enough right now, right? We're used to having somebody else generally educate our children. We generally have space and for that's more defined about work and home. So it can feel very overwhelming. A couple of things are to think about where your priorities in terms of each of those domains, and try to hit the top marks and recognize you're not going to hit everything else. If you're this questioner has another adult in the home, not everyone does, but if you can have the conversation with the other adults in the home about what both your needs are in terms of work and your relationship, so then you can think about how do you share what needs to happen with children who are in the home. Certainly the data I've been seeing in the US, unsurprisingly, is that women are carrying more of the burden at home right now with these kind of transitions. They're often the ones still thinking about managing the household, figuring out what to do with kids, as well as having a job. And because of historical differences in terms of pay and things like that, sometimes families are making decisions, well, you earn less, so it's okay if you're not working as much as I am. But that maybe doesn't work for individual households, right? When there's a gender split like that. So if there's an adult in the home, whether it's a partner, whether it's a roommate, whatever, have the conversation with the adult first about what the needs are for both adults, and trying to maintain work, maintain home. How can you split that? And then try to roll out a plan that's going to fit your individual situation and let go of a lot of the unessential stuff. My current favorite funny little meme on Facebook is, for a long time I thought I would whenever I finally had the time, I'd have a clean house. And the person is saying, I have the time and I still don't have a clean house. Clearly
right.
not the reason, right? So some of us may think, well, we're home all the time, we should have the time to do certain things, but we don't. It's suddenly new routines, children are having struggle adapting to it. Or they're not understanding, the life just doesn't go the way you think it might. And the working from home, work is always there, and it can be very hard to separate from it. So the first place is, and if you're the only adult in the house, sort of figuring out what's going to work for your particular sort of, what are the needs in each of those categories, and aim for hitting the top ones, not everything. And then practice a little grace and patience with yourself as well as the others in your life while you try to figure out what's going to be good enough. And chances are, if you've been successful in your career, good enough has not generally been how you've operated. But for a while, good enough might need to be where we're at until we hit some sort of stride in how this is going to function for us.
I mean, I think that guilt feelings, that shoulding, that feeling unproductive, let it go. Sing the Frozen song in your head to yourself if you have to. Let it go. Nobody taught us how to survive a pandemic. This is not something we learned in school. There is no right or wrong here. It is okay to not be okay right now. That's the reality. And then that being said, find those small successes that you do have, whether it's getting up and showering and dressing that day. That's a success. That's great. Getting food on the table for the kids, and maybe they spent 2 hours more watching their devices than you would normally let it, but it got you able to get some work done and everybody stayed relatively peaceful. That's a success. So I think we need to really identify and reprioritize what our expectations are, what's realistic right now. We need to give ourselves a break. We need to give our families a break. We need to give our coworkers a break, and just let it go.
Thank you. And with that, we were going to hand it over to Dr. Einstein to go through her presentation, and at the end, we have 2 more questions.
Thank you. Okay, that was wonderful. I really enjoyed listening to both Dr. Bufka and Dr. Wright. And I want to take a slightly different take now and explain to you the research that we've been doing and the journey that we've been on in terms of understanding how do people handle uncertainty and how do we respond to uncertainty and what are the differences between people in handling uncertainty. Some people think that the way that we handle uncertainty is exactly the same and that we're always talking about anxiety, but I'm going to sort of take you through the way that I've thought about it, and I've been working in this area now, specifically in uncertainty for 10 years and working with as a clinical psychologist and looking at how actually obsessive compulsive patients handle uncertainty for my whole career. So I'm just going to show you a little bit of a presentation. And what I'm hoping is that at the end of it, that's going to lead you to a different way of thinking about what's happening on all the different levels that have come up so far today. Where I started on this is 9 years ago, my niece was born very prematurely. She was born 100 days too early and she was less than a kilo. And when I look at how my brother and sister-in-law have handled looking after her, they've had to scrub up much more than we're now having to scrub up to keep ourselves clean in the morning and in the evening. And it really struck me how different they were in handling uncertainty compared to clients that we'd been seeing at Westmead Hospital in the anxiety clinic, because there we'd have people that were, for example, presenting with obsessive compulsive disorder. And what I did for my PhD was looked at how could we target OCD by helping people handle uncertainty better. So if you think about it for a moment, someone with severe or with OCD might have the thought that they are going to be, that a family member might be in a car accident and they might tap their leg or they might tap the wood to stop that happening. So that person's not sitting with uncertainty. And what I wanted to do was try and see if I could first of all understand and put together a model about how we handle uncertainty, and secondly see whether we could change people's reactions to uncertainty. You're more likely to have a greater number of psychological disorders going together. So the more you don't like uncertainty, the more of those disorders that you will report in studies. And we've seen that in our research at Macquarie and at the St Vincent's Anxiety Disorder Clinic. They did that first study which showed that. And in fact, if you look down this left-hand corner where I've got in blue a whole range of different problems, social anxiety, generalized anxiety disorder, which is when a person says that they worry too much, obsessive compulsive disorder, and all the others underneath it, what we see is that all the people in those groups would say that they don't like uncertainty more than people that don't have those sorts of problems, okay? In our research at Macquarie also, when we're looking at students, we've seen that students in Year 9, in Australia, the NAPLAN's really important, and we find that students who say that they don't like uncertainty are more likely to say also that they have distracting thoughts during NAPLAN. Now, here's another question for you. If you are a worrier and you worry a lot, do you think that you would take a long time to find a solution to a problem, or that you'd be quicker to take and faster to find a solution to a problem? Just think about that for a moment. The answer is up here on the right, and it's actually that people who worry a lot tend to react to problems more with urgency because they want to get out of the problem. So they're trying to push away feelings, and we see that people who react with urgency in situations are also more likely to be impulsive and have impulsive behaviours, or start using substances earlier in their life. And I'm talking about alcohol and other sorts of substances. So that's what the research shows. The research also shows that before we improve in worry, if we're treating people who have come to the clinic to get help for worry, we'll actually see first a reduction in their dislike of uncertainty, that scale that I was talking about before. That actually goes before they improve. So it's something that I think is really important to for us to be thinking about. Now, when I presented this research, quite a while ago to my colleagues, they kind of said to me, well, hang on, Danielle, you're talking about anxiety. It's the same thing as anxiety. That's exactly what you're talking about. And so we did a study because what I wanted to know is actually, is it the same thing as anxiety and can we change it? So in the study that we did, it was actually quite a hard study to run. We had 550 students. They were in year 8 and year 9. And we had clinicians come in and they received a program which was aimed at helping them handle their emotions. And the components of the program were here on this page. So we had just a range of the sorts of things you'd see in resilience building programs at schools. And we had 2 different conditions. In one condition, we really drummed home the message about uncertainty and we added it in every element that we could. And in the other condition, we didn't. It was just a standard program in which we were still talking about all those important factors and using the right techniques, but we weren't really mentioning uncertainty and how a person handles uncertainty. Now, what we saw was that, first of all, there were no pre-treatment difference between those 550 students. The teachers and the students, by the way, didn't know which classes they'd been assigned to. We saw that, and there was no difference in their dislike of uncertainty beforehand. Afterwards, though, anxiety reduced in both groups, but dislike of uncertainty only reduced in this group here, which was that received that special, the special treatment where we really drum the message home. Like I say, every other aspect was the same. And then the next important thing that we wanted to look at was, well, let's divide up that group of students into people who were initially low with either anxiety or depression, which is the blue line and the green line. And let's divide them up and compare what happened to them as opposed to the people that were high with either anxiety or depression when we started, which is the red line and the purple line. And what we see with that dislike of uncertainty score happening over time, and this is before we ran the program here, this is after we ran the program, and this is a whole year later when we measured that dislike of uncertainty score, we saw that in the low symptom group, it didn't matter which condition they were in, it didn't matter which resilience building program, their dislike of uncertainty did come down over time, right? So that is the blue line and the green line. They were both tracking down. But what did matter was that if they were in that high symptom group before we started and they got into the group where we didn't talk about uncertainty and we didn't address it in our resilient building package, then those people didn't change their dislike of uncertainty scores over time. So it's something that we want to address separately, and it's not exactly the same thing as anxiety. Now, let's see if we can find what my next slide is. Okay, now what happened in the last few years, as we all know, and I'd really love people to see, we made a video about phone addiction and how dopamine's released, and it's on thedip.com. I'm not very good at sharing my websites, but I'm trying to improve on that. It's a 2.5-minute video, which will just show you exactly how uncertainty plays out to pull us in. With regard to phones and how our mood gets played around by phones. Right now, I know as an aside that we are all using our phones and devices, and we're going to put out a bit more information about how to do that in a healthy way. And I think the connections, you know, thank goodness for our phones and for our computers and for social media right now, as long as we're using it in a way that's not fueling our worry, which I'll talk about. I know I'm running out of time, so I better speed up. Anyway, we'll just think for a moment that in the last few years, people who don't like uncertainty, and in fact, the whole population has been able to escape uncertainty by asking questions to friends, looking up answers on Google the moment they have a question. So it's actually an issue in terms of our ability to handle uncertainty. So this is a model that I put together years ago when I was understanding all the research that's out there and wanted to explain it to people. And this model's been published. You can go to this website at the bottom if you want to look at the paper and understand exactly what I'm talking about in terms of how can clinicians handle uncertainty, and if you want to find the model. But But basically, if we try and understand what's happening now, you take a situation that involves uncertainty. So right now, for example, it's, should I go and do the supermarket shopping, right? Or should I get it delivered? And I make a threat estimate at the time about whether or not that's a safe or not safe thing to do. And I might wear gloves, or I might wear a mask, or I might just, you know, be really careful and wash my hands afterwards. And we're getting a lot of information in about what's healthy to do. Then we come down to, and this is the really important system, and I think that Dr. Bufka and Dr. Wright were both referring to this before when they were talking, and that is, it's the way that we think about what's important to us as a person. What am I shooting for right now? What are my goals? Because when my goals come into conflict and I'm really not sure what to do now, that's when I start to feel a bit unhappy and I'm not really sure what direction to go. So I need to look after my family and do the shopping. And one of the things I try to do is make sure we've got food at home. So that's an important thing to go to for me to do, but I might be conflicted, but I'm running out of time, so I'm going to speed up. When we're in this situation of uncertainty, let's say we've heard, let's switch situations and say I've heard that my mother is going out. At that point, I might start to be a bit worried because I don't know whether she's coming into harm's way. I don't know whether she's getting close to people. And the problem is nothing bad has happened yet. So I start to think about how bad it would be for something to happen to her, but I then stop myself because it's not that useful at this point in time. So I start to get a few of the feelings, but then those feelings, I can't get to the end point. So now we go into whether a person really dislikes uncertainty or whether they're low and they're actually more flexible and able to handle uncertainty naturally. And I think what's happening now is, even now, sometimes some of the low people we're all responding in this high way at times. If we go down here, this is now when we start to feel a bit agitated in our bodies, a bit uncomfortable. And then the question is, what do you do with that? So if you do things like, if you want to worry a lot, if you want to talk a lot, seek out a lot of the danger-related information, or you're doing things that, for instance, are not overly useful, what happens is you end up back in this system and you go back and you're making your threat estimates and you just keep going round and round. If you're doing it in a more helpful way where you realize it's not that healthy to worry, it's not that healthy, then you might do a bit of talking about and a bit of healthy reflection on what's going on for you. And you end up back here being able to reevaluate your goals, what's important for me right now, and then you can work out what you're shooting for each day and over the week, and we'll experiment and get things right or wrong. So, and there was a really interesting finding or report or a theory that was put out actually in 2010 that said that people who really don't like uncertainty, rather than to be taken by surprise, they'd be happier to feel bad all the time. I think that was just an interesting finding. So what I have done with my team right now is try to put together a very short program. It's an 1.5 hour program for people to do, which will give you the language. Now, I haven't talked about that now because I just wanted to explain the theory and the research and why it's important. But I think we all need to be understanding the difference between our response to uncertainty and response to other emotions that Dr. Wright and Dr. Bufka were talking about before. There's disappointment right now, there's loneliness, there's frustration, there's a whole lot of things going on, and we actually need to take different approaches to that as to the way as to our uncertainty and our anxiety. And so the course we're putting together is very, very simply will give you the language and the skills and the strategies to put in place. And we've got a program for schools so that teachers can work through over 5 lessons how students and parents can work through this as well. So I'll stop. I'm happy to take questions on that model. Maybe I've taken up too much time. I'm sorry.
Sorry to cut you off there, Danielle, Dr. Danielle, but that was very interesting. I do apologise. We are running out of time, so we need to cut back to questions. Firstly, thank you all 3 guest presenters. That was Excellent. That was really good. That was very natural. There's a mixture of, discussion as well as theory to back these up. And I think a lot of people got it out of there. I'd like to address the last two questions before we leave. Many of us have friends and family who are healthcare providers. How can we deal with grief? In general, how can we support the healthcare providers in our community?
I'm so grateful people are asking that question. I think it's really important. There's both the immediate situation right now. Healthcare providers in many places are working their tails off. They're working long shifts, long hours, dealing with situations that are exactly not what health care providers want. They want to be able to help people to save lives. And in some situations, they're not feeling they have the resources to do that or the capacity to do that because of the pressures on the system. So you want to think both what might people need immediately and offer and let them accept or not accept what you're offering. It could be actual support in terms of drop off meals, get things for kids, clean the scrubs, whatever it is that is appropriate within the physical distancing that people are being asked to do. It could be they would like you to sort of listen to the things that are stressing them out, that they're overwhelmed by, that they're not sure how to deal with. Or it could be that for them, if they're on the front lines to cope, they're sort of going to put it in a container and they're going to leave it there and they're going to go to work the next day. And it will be after this is passed that emotionally they may actually really want your support. So you need to think both right now, what are the kinds of things that you can do and offer, suggest, be willing to run to the store and get something, to look online for resources for the kids who maybe are struggling, whatever it is they ask, but also to be there when this pandemic that curve has flattened, that we aren't in this place of social distancing and seeing so many people in hospitals very sick and struggling with that, when they may actually then have the emotional space and time to deal with their very challenging situation that they're in, be there then as well, to be able to provide some support and to handle to the extent that you can, hearing from them about the tough situations that they're dealing with, and then turn to your support network to process your own response. Let them sort of pour out to you, and then you look to the people in your network for how to handle that, because it's not going to be easy. It's tough situations that they're in.
Yeah, and I think the first part of the question about what to do if you have a loved one that is sick, the advice is really similar. It's about trying to identify acts of service that you can do for them, whether that's bringing them food. And I think it's also about making sure you're staying connected to them. I think one of the things we're hearing about this virus is that it can turn kind of quickly. And so if you have loved ones maybe that live alone, to make sure you're checking on them regularly, that they are still able to recover at home versus when they might need to go to the hospital. And so being kind of aware of that and helping people make those decisions when they're sick is also really important, because when you're sick, you're not a great decision maker. It's hard to kind of figure out what's the right thing to do. And so being there for them during that is also really helpful.
Excellent, thank you. Next question. What gives me anxiety is the horizon. With that, no expert knows when this will be over. How long are we going to have to stay at home? When things go back to the new normal? Is it really safe to do so? These are the things that keep me up. Do you have any suggestions with dealing with this?
I wouldn't mind just showing that screen again when I'm sort of thinking about, because the way that I think about this, can you see that screen?
Not yet.
Not yet.
Okay. I'll just have a look at it maybe and talk it through. But I think what's happening there is that's where we're going into that pre-motion stuff, and really, and that's where it's important to think about it for a little bit, but not for too long, because we do need to wait and see what's going to happen before we start to. Humans are really good at adapting, and we need to have a bit of confidence that we will be able to adapt. But we can't start to deal with it until we know what we're dealing with.
Excellent.
Over.
No, that's a very good answer. Okay, well, I think we're going to wrap it up there. I'd like to thank Dr. Dahlia Eislein, Dr. Lynn Bufka, Dr. Vale Wright. Thank you for your time. This has been a great webinar, and thank you for all our attendees.